I am Maria Dalton, about to turn 27 this year. It's been 5 years since I got married, and my son, Martin, just celebrated his fourth birthday. Initially, I worked full-time after tying the knot, but now I've transitioned to part-time employment at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years my senior. The story of Kevin Carlton's passionate courtship that led to our marriage left a lasting impression on me. However, post-wedding, Kevin's once kind demeanor transformed into a more domineering one. He has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, whom he spoils, likely due to their significant age gap. Before marriage, I didn't pay much heed to Jane and Kevin's relationship, thinking they got along well. Yet, after tying the knot, I began noticing changes in Jane's behavior. She frequently visits our house unannounced, at any time of the day or night, making me feel like a maid catering to her selfish demands. Jane never brings any gifts or expressions of gratitude during her visits. In fact, she acts as if I don't exist, speaking exclusively to Kevin with a casual brother, "I'm here again." Kevin, in turn, invites her to join our meals, even if they were prepared for only 3 people. When I try to discreetly inform Kevin that I hadn't prepared dinner for Jane, he dismisses me, and I end up serving my portion to her. In an attempt to avoid confrontation, I prepare my own meal from leftovers. Kevin, however, publicly blames me for not being considerate enough to make extra food, making Jane apologize to me. Despite her words, it's evident that Jane finds reassurance in Kevin's treatment and takes joy in the situation. During a meal with Kevin, Jane, and my son Martin, Jane suddenly asks Kevin to discuss something privately. Kevin moves Martin and me to another room, a scenario that has become all too familiar. After finishing our meal and heading to the kitchen for cleanup, I'm left reflecting on the recurring challenges in our dynamic. Kevin and Jane were engaged in lively conversation on the sofa, completely oblivious to the untouched dishes from their meal left on the dining table. It seemed to me that they viewed me not as a wife or sister-in-law, but more like a maid. They didn't acknowledge Martin either, treating him as if a maid had brought her child to work. While cleaning up in the kitchen and preparing to take a bath with Martin, Kevin suddenly called out loudly, even though it was almost 8 p.m. He insisted that Jane wanted a cake and instructed me to buy one immediately from a specific shop near the station. As I hesitated, Jane impatiently declared her desire for the cake, and Kevin urged me to go, disregarding Martin's bedtime. Feeling compelled, I reluctantly decided to go to the cake shop. The shop closed at 9 p.m., so I hurried to make it in time. However, as I got ready, I'd overheard Kevin and Jane speaking loudly enough for me to hear. They made comments like, "She's so inconsiderate," and questioned Kevin's decision to marry me. Unable to leave Martin behind, I took him with me to the cake shop. While getting him ready, Kevin's loud voice from the living room reached my ears, threatening divorce if I defied him again. I knew Martin could hear it too, even if he couldn't comprehend the words. He could sense his parents were in conflict. Suppressing my intense emotions, I asked Martin what kind of cake he would like. He brightened up, expressing his desire for a cake with lots of fruits. Our journey to the cake shop became a pleasant discussion about cakes, momentarily overshadowing Kevin's harsh words. Martin and I reached the cake shop just before closing time, fortunately finding the cake Jane wanted. We purchased 2 cakes and the fruit-loaded cake Martin desired. Upon returning home, after serving cakes to Jane and Kevin, I proceeded to prepare the cake Martin had chosen and made my way to the dining room. However, as soon as I placed Martin's cake in front of him, Jane pointed at it and expressed her desire for that cake after all. Before I could react, Kevin swiftly moved the cake Martin had selected in front of Jane. Ignoring Martin's protests, Jane started eating his chosen cake. Kevin asserted his right to choose since he bought the cake with his own money, and when I voiced my dissatisfaction, he threatened with the possibility of divorce. Although Martin stopped crying, he held my hand tightly, looking anxious. After some contemplation, he said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries on it. Yes, it's really delicious, expressing his fondness for the cake Jane initially wanted. Feeling like I was making Martin endure too much, I couldn't help but recognize the absurdity of 3 adults subjecting a 4-year-old child to such circumstances. Witnessing Jane reach for Martin's cake, I lifted his cake plate and took him to another room, wanting him to savor his cake in peace. Kevin, possibly realizing Jane's actions, apologized to her for seeming stingy. Despite my desire to retort, I refrained from exposing Martin to the word divorce. Watching Martin enjoy his cake, blissfully unaware, brought a momentary sense of purity. After finishing the cake, disregarding both Kevin and Jane, we opted for a late bath and decided to sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Jane had already left. As I prepared to wake up Kevin and Martin for breakfast, I heard Martin's crying and rushed to him. To my shock, Martin's piggy bank, a gift from my father, was broken, and the savings inside were gone. Martin had a ritual of saying goodnight to the piggy bank before sleeping, and last night was no different. When I inquired about it, Kevin casually mentioned that Jane needed some money, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding Martin, who was crying and shaking, I could feel his pain so acutely that I cried with him. The realization that Kevin prioritized and cared for his sister Jane more than our son Martin stirred a mix of anger and sadness within me. The morning brought a heavy sense of dread, and I felt terrible. Kevin called out, exclaiming, "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much for the first time since our marriage." Expressing my anger towards him, I couldn't bear to see our son so hurt, breaking my usual resolve to avoid arguments in front of Martin. Kevin, with an intense gaze, went to the bedroom without uttering a word. Shockingly, he returned with divorce papers, a revelation to me as I didn't know he had hidden them somewhere. "If you're not happy with me, then let's divorce," he declared, thrusting the papers at me before leaving the house with a loud bang. Martin, who had never cried over the issues with Kevin and Jane, must have reached his limit. He'd have been crying since the previous night. Unable to witness Martin's pain any longer, I suggested skipping daycare for the day. Martin, seemingly delighted to be with me, responded with a loud yes and a faint smile. Holding a picture book, he sat on my lap and innocently remarked, "The teacher at the nursery today was Mama, right?" He looked like an angel, and I believed his little heart must be filled with patience. Deciding to play as much as we could to heal his heart, I took a day off from work after explaining the situation to my workplace. In the morning, we went to the park, played hide and seek, and had a lot of fun in the sandbox and on the slide. Upon returning home for lunch, Martin seemed sleepy, and despite usually napping on his own, today he fell asleep on my lap, reminiscent of when he was a baby. Although I had planned to do household chores while Martin napped, I decided to savor the special moment and be healed by his sleeping face and breathing. As I dozed off, a noise from the entrance startled me. It sounded like the front door had opened, but it wasn't time for Kevin to come home yet, arousing suspicion. Quickly grabbing Martin and taking only my bag with valuables, I hid in the bedroom closet, holding my breath. I heard a voice. Someone had entered the house. I had heard a noise from somewhere before, and it seemed like someone was searching the house for something. The voice echoed, saying, "Ah, I can't find it. Where has that wife hidden it?" Trembling in fear for a while due to the rummaging noise, I carefully listened to the voice and realized it was Jane. Questions flooded my mind. Why did she have a key? And what was she looking for? Curiosity got the better of me, and I'd opened the closet slightly to observe what Jane was up to. She was energetically opening and closing drawers and doors, audibly sighing before making a phone call. I searched where I was told, but it wasn't there. Yeah, I checked there too. If it's not there, it was a waste of time. "Okay, I got it. I'm going home now, Kevin," she declared on the phone. I wondered about the purpose of their search and what they were looking for. The sound of the front door locking followed. After emerging from the closet, I put Martin to bed and reflected on the strange events. It struck me that Kevin might know about his belongings, and if they were searching for something unknown in location, could it be one of my belongings? However, The earlier conversation with Jane didn't offer any clues about why she had entered the house. Suddenly, Kevin seemed like a stranger, and a mix of disgust and fear enveloped me. Hastily packing the essentials for Martin and me, I was ready to leave when Martin woke up from his nap. "Martin, let's go to Grandpa's place now," I said as we headed to the station and took a train to my parents' house. Luckily, my parents' home was nearby, just 2 stations away. I hadn't contacted them beforehand, but sensing something from my face, they welcomed us without asking any questions. Their pet dog, a favorite of Martin's, immediately engaged him in play. Feeling relieved, I recounted everything that had happened with Kevin and Jane. My mother speculated that if Jane was searching for my belongings, it might be my cash cards. As she spoke, I recalled my previous experience as the CEO of a successful online shop for handmade goods before getting married. I had entrusted the company to trustworthy friends while focusing on raising my child, working part-time from home. Kevin wasn't aware that I still held the CEO position, but he knew about my past as a successful CEO and likely suspected that I had savings. There's a significant reason why I haven't fully disclosed to Kevin that I am still the CEO and have savings. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered that he has poor money management skills and tends to spend all his earnings. He allocated a mere $200 for our monthly food expenses and even suggested I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. Living with Martin and managing on just $200 for food was challenging, and I never agreed to abandon my job entirely. After much reluctance, he allowed me to work part-time at my current company. To prevent the possibility of divorce, Kevin compelled me to sign a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I've received only $200 for food, using my savings for his nursery fees and clothes. I've never sought additional financial support from Kevin, leading him to believe I have ample savings. Considering Jane's apparent financial struggles and Kevin's perception of my savings, it seems plausible that they are searching for my cash cards. I maintain a separate savings account for Martin, where a portion of my salary is regularly deposited. Regardless, there's a high likelihood that Kevin and Jane are specifically seeking my cash cards, given their financial needs. Despite their search, they won't find them because I always carry valuable items like my cash cards with me. However, the unresolved issue remains. Jane might be entering our house even when we're absent, and Kevin could be allowing it. In light of my father's advice to safeguard my valuables at my parents' house, I decided to store them in their safe, pondering over the question of why they need money to the extent of engaging in such actions. Martin approached my father crying, explaining that his piggy bank was broken and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father's face turned red with anger upon hearing Martin's story, and he expressed his intent to call Kevin and address the situation. My mother, however, advised against rushing and emphasized the importance of calmly uncovering their purpose. With Kevin mentioning divorce, my mother foresaw the possibility of him shifting blame and suggested we understand their intentions thoroughly to prevent them from escaping with a convenient excuse. I resolved to record their conversation to unveil the purpose behind their actions. My parents, who were longtime friends with a lawyer, decided to consult him. Upon returning home, I began cooking dinner while discreetly recording on my phone with the screen facing down to remain unnoticed. To my surprise, Kevin returned home and immediately inquired about the location of my cash cards. When I questioned his motives, he provided vague answers, attempting to deceive me. Remaining silent, I was met with Kevin's frustration as he demanded all my part-time earnings for his sister. I firmly rejected, explaining that the money was for Martin's savings. This angered Kevin, and he pushed the signed divorce papers towards me, accusing me of living off his money. He callously asserted that I didn't need to save for Martin and implied that divorce would leave me financially helpless. Shockingly, he seemed to value Jane more than our own son, Martin. Stunned by his words, I silently abandoned dinner preparation, packed the divorce papers in a bag, took Martin's hand, and headed for the door. In response, Kevin shouted that he was serious about the divorce and warned me not to return. I retorted that I couldn't come back to a house where a stranger could come and go freely, referring to Jane. Was it too much to call my sister-in-law a stranger? Following my departure, Kevin bombarded me with messages and calls, which I chose to ignore. Turning off my phone, I sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I played the recorded conversation and showed them the completed divorce papers Kevin had given me. Despite lacking love or affection for Kevin, I expressed my concern for Martin. My parents, acknowledging the possibility of hurting Martin's feelings through divorce, offered their perspective. While grappling with this decision, Martin, hungry, requested his favorite dish, hamburgers. My mother, with a kind smile, prepared them, and Martin expressed his joy, declaring that Grandma's hamburger was so good he wanted to eat it every day. Touched by Martin's kindness, I couldn't hold back tears. My father explained to Martin that these were tears of happiness, and he hugged me. Martin, unaware of the situation, innocently said the hamburger contained the feeling of love, urging me to eat it with him to cheer myself up. Overwhelmed by emotions, my tear glands collapsed, and I couldn't stop crying. In this tender moment, my father explained to Martin that the hamburger was delicious, and if Jane were here, she would have enjoyed it too. Hearing this, Martin broke into tears, and I hugged him, while my father's eyes turned bright red, watching the poignant scene unfold. I said to Martin, "Isn't it a blessing to be with family?" He looked surprised and responded, "Didn't Dad say that only Jane was family? Is my family just Mom and Grandpa and Grandma?" My father gently replied, "Yes, that's right," and continued by asking Martin if he wanted to live with us as family. Martin responded with a laugh, saying, "Of course, we're family," making everyone naturally smile. As we enjoyed a meal filled with endless laughter and conversation, I couldn't help but marvel at the happiness that surrounded us. Despite contemplating divorce, this meal felt so joyous that I finally made the decision to part ways with Kevin and planned to discuss it with Martin. Although the prospect of divorce weighed heavy on my heart, it seemed Martin had never truly felt loved by his father, and he happily embraced the idea of us living as a family. He even affectionately hugged our pet dog, calling him my younger brother despite the dog being older than him. I began preparations for the divorce, first reaching out to a lawyer who was a friend of my father. We arranged to meet the next day. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, their faint laughter providing me comfort as I laid in bed in the same room as my mother, reminiscing about my childhood. The next day, as I turned on my smartphone, I was met with over 200 calls and messages from Kevin, reflecting his emotional instability. The mere sight of it exhausted me, prompting me to turn off my smartphone once again. I met with the lawyer that day, discussing the details and confirming my intention to divorce. We successfully formalized the contract, and the lawyer was set to meet with Kevin the following day. After a while, the lawyer visited my parents' house to explain the situation. It turned out that Jane had accumulated significant debt from a casino and her shopping addiction, and Kevin had acted as her guarantor. The plan was to use my savings to cover the repayments, and now Kevin wanted me and Martin back, attempting to halt the divorce. The lawyer revealed that the divorce papers I had handed over had already been submitted, and when asked if this meant the divorce was accepted, the lawyer confirmed, "Yes, it has been accepted." Kevin, upon hearing the news, seemed to sob, expressing his reluctance for another man to have me. Despite his emotional turmoil, I found peace in knowing that the divorce had been finalized. Surprisingly, Kevin even signed a pledge to pay $340 per month for Martin's support. Later, Kevin called me, his tone lacking the previous aggression, and he calmly began talking. He admitted to keeping me financially bound, thinking it would prevent thoughts of divorce. He also confessed to spoiling Jane, believing it was a form of sibling love. While he wasn't indifferent towards Martin, he felt jealous, thinking he had lost me to our son. Kevin expressed his intention to come for me once he settled Jane's debts, asking me not to remarry until then. Firmly, I told him I no longer loved him and wouldn't reconsider. I could faintly hear his sobbing before he said, "Please be happy," and hung up. Did I manage to remain strong until the end? I discussed future plans with my parents and decided to stay at their house until Martin grows up, as he also transferred to a different nursery. I returned to my role as a company president after explaining the situation to my work friends. Later, I heard that Kevin and Jane informed their parents about the divorce and their debt, resulting in both being disowned. More than the debt, their parents were furious about never seeing their grandson again. The once close-knit Kevin and Jane now live in a cramped old apartment, constantly blaming each other. Their actions have consequences, and today, I find happiness being with my family.